with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
What is up, Gamer Nation? Welcome to the Me and Steve Talk RPGs podcast. I'm Steve. I'm hosted here by my friend Steve.
Yes, hello. Welcome, Gamer Nation.
So, as you may have heard, we are now part of the D20 Radio Network. So that is a very exciting prospect for us.
Yeah, well, I think we have to blame GM Chris. I mean, you know, we get him on to talk, and before we even get to actually talking with him, he's like, why haven't you guys joined the network yet? And we're kind of like, both of us are stumbling, going, well, we kind of wanted to talk to you about that, but we didn't know how to say it.
Right, and we didn't want to be like, can we play with you guys?
Yeah, he actually, before we even got a chance to say anything, invited us to the party. So, yeah, I think we're gonna come try and, well, have fun with everybody.
Yeah, we're gonna put our best foot forward, and definitely exciting and definitely welcoming, and to any new listeners we might gain from that, we want to welcome you.
Yes.
So let's actually talk about some of the other shows that are on the D20 Radio Network, because me and you both listen to a lot of them, or not a lot of them, but a couple of them. And one of them that I just wanted to highlight is a way to shout them out. Fairly new podcast, much like ourselves, it appears. You know, episode 6 looks like was posted April 6th of this year, talking about what comes after.
Yeah, I've been seeing that one.
I've been seeing it around. I definitely want, it's on my to listen list, but the elevator pitch is what has sold me on it so hard. Basically, the world ended in the mid-'80s. Billions of people died. About 5 years later, so probably about the mid-'90s, 4 survivors discover that everything's about to change again. And that just is a really cool Genesis actual play podcast that is up my alley. Like, I'm all for that. So
Yeah, no, the premise, yeah, like you said, it's right up my alley as well. I love that kind of post-apocalyptic thing, and it has been kind of one of those ones I keep going, well, okay, man, I want to listen to that. And then, look, I'll be honest, folks, I have a problem with podcasts. in our Discord channel, which, by the way, y'all feel free to be a link in the show notes, so come on down and join us. I posted a screenshot that I took last week of the listening stats on my Podbean. And what's scary is I think it was about a year ago that Podbean dumped a bunch of stuff, so I don't think this is, in fact, I'm sure it's not accurate, because
yeah, Podbean had a big update and then changed all of their subscriptions, and both me and you had to go through and like resubscribe to a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and I did the math only because, well, again, I'm that much of a nerd, because I listened to the entirety of Critical Role's Campaign 1 on Podbean. And I know that totals, well, not just that, but that with all the other stuff I would listen to. In any case, my Podbean currently shows me having my total playtime was over 3,300 hours. And what I found even scarier is it has the little thing where you can turn on the intelligent speed where it automatically shortens silences. I have saved over 50 hours in that feature alone.
See, I don't use that, but I being that you've saved yourself that much time, I'm kind of tempted to start using it.
But like I said, I do have a podcast problem, I'll admit it, because I listen to a lot of stuff, including, I think, 4 shows that are on the D20 network currently. So yeah, I listen to a lot of stuff, and these guys are, what comes after cast is something that I've really been going, ooh, I want to check it out. So I would advise y'all to do the same, and I'm probably going to do that, maybe even this week.
Yeah, it's definitely going on in my rotation. It's going to the top of the list because I've just gotten caught up with Critical Role, so now I have to take a little bit of time off that and let everything fall back so I have 40 hours of podcast to listen to again.
See, when I get down to 30-some episodes in the queue, I'm doing good.
Yeah, see, I'm at the point where I am now concurrent, and so I'm going, I gotta stop listening to this.
I do like to do that sometimes, though, with actual play stuff that has shorter episodes. I'll intentionally let it go and then binge it.
Well, I'll be honest, I have been getting into, so 40K, which I've talked about, but I've been getting into golf recently, like more than I ever have. And so I'm literally standing in my backyard hitting my like wedges just 30 feet just to practice something and listening to podcast for 2, 3, 4 hours on end.
Fair enough.
It got so bad, my girlfriend came out and was like, "Are you not froze to death?" I'm like, "No, I'm good."
No, I'm fortunate in a lot of ways in that I can listen to a lot of podcasts while I do my job at work.
Yeah, me too at the current moment. So, but that's going to change hopefully. But what's our actual topic for the week, Steve?
Well, I think we were going to talk maybe a little bit about inspiration and where we kind of find it, where you can go to look for it.
So, what inspiration is that randomly your DM decides to give you 1 point of it, and it can give you advantage on any check. Wait, we're not talking about. Okay.
No, Steve.
Oh, well.
We're not talking about inspiration as a game mechanic.
Oh, we're talking about actual inspiration. So where I steal my ideas from. I mean, borrow.
Well, to quote Chris from last week, beg, borrow, and steal. But yeah, that's really, I mean, that's what it is, you know. I think I read somewhere once that it's often considered in the writing community that there are only something like 7 original stories, and that can apply any which way as far as, you know, be it character concepts, story concepts, anything like that.
There are 7 original stories, and 5 of them follow the hero's journey.
Fair enough.
What happened here? Okay, sorry.
Did you see something shiny again?
I opened my browser to go to my notes, and it was like something went wrong, and I was like, oh no.
My notes are usually just a series of things I bookmarked, and then I go, why did I bookmark this? I don't understand.
I do that a lot. To get off on a tangent for a half a second.
By the way, just to hold on for a second. For those of you from the D20 network that have just discovered us, we actually thought of naming the podcast Tangent Land, but it didn't seem as amusing as Me and Steve.
I thought you were going a different direction with that, so I'm going to go that direction.
Okay.
For those of you that have discovered us from the D20 radio network, we truly apologize.
No, we appreciate them, Steve.
We do appreciate you, but we also truly apologize for all of the tangents that you're going to follow us on to this episode.
Yes, we freely realize that, well, both of us lack conversation permanence and that we will routinely chase rabbits in random directions.
Speaking of chasing rabbits, let's talk about ideas. So, a lot of where I pull my inspiration for games comes from what I've read in my youth.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up reading, and I was just telling you this before the podcast, but when I was in about 8th grade, I was reading Isaac Asimov. And it's just what I really cut my teeth on. So that really hard sci-fi, if it's pulp, that's for me. If it has, if it's pulpy in any way, Indiana Jones is a perfect example. I love that movies, all 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
But seriously, if it was pulp, if it was action, if it was intrigue, I was reading it. Clancy and all of the terrible young adult novels that I read back in the early 2000s. I get a lot of my inspiration from just the fact that pulp intrigues me.
Well, I think that's the thing for anybody, though, is the stuff you find entertaining is where you're going to find that inspiration, you know? Like you said, you got into a lot of different novels, and okay, I'm a bit older than you, but in that same, when I was in that age range is about when I fell down the Tom Clancy rabbit hole, and I was reading whatever I could get my hands on, Tom Clancy, assorted other authors in that genre. I remember Larry Bond. I read a novel or 2 from him. And then, I did branch out. I read some Larry Nevin. But I think, inspiration, you do draw a lot of it from, be it books or film or television. But it's really, there's stuff in a lot of places that, okay, if you're taking it straight from a book or television or a movie, probably at least someone's going to recognize it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But sometimes if you kind of combine it with something else from another less common source, it really feels fresh to people, even though it's the same thing.
Sometimes even taking two common sources and combining them can throw people off.
Yeah.
You know, like, we all love Star Wars, but at the end of the day, Star Wars is magical cowboys in space.
Yeah.
That's really what Star Wars is. It's this sword and sorcery story, but told in
space.
Yeah, in space. I was losing my words, but in space. Whatever interests you is definitely gonna be enough. Like, if you like very hard historical dramas, I have good news. You can do really interesting games with very hard historical drama. If you look at something like, and I know we've talked about this before, which is a teaching tool, but if you look at something like Ross Rifles,
Mm-hmm.
you tell a very serious game with their very serious story with that, and it's based, it's historically accurate.
Mm-hmm. Well, Night Witches is another one that's based in history very much. That's a story about I believe it was a World War II Russian flying squadron that was entirely women, that all their equipment was also literally the leftovers from the men of the Russian Air Force, or whatever it was called at the time.
Right. And it's very, you can pull a lot from a lot of places. I mean, just to go to one of the most popular RPGs out there, Call of Cthulhu is based off of the Cthulhu novels written by H.P. Lovecraft, which is, yes, it is problematic, but there's a lot of other great cosmic horror written by other artists who aren't him.
Yeah, I think at this point yes, it's based on, it has its origins in his fiction, but the problematic themes that he's was problematic about are not in the game.
No, they've done a very good job at removing it and not, that not being part of that game. It's just a, you do have to acknowledge when talking about anything Lovecraft, it's, you have to acknowledge the man that started the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, to their credit, and I have yet to pick this up, I keep meaning to, but Chaosium officially picked up Chris Spivey's Harlem Unbound, which is written, I've heard a number of people say it is the treatise as far as how to run, be it people of color or people unlike yourself, in a game context. Like I said, I have yet to get it myself. As I understand it, the first edition is technically systemless, where the second edition of Harlem Unbound is statted out for, I would assume, 7th edition Call of Cthulhu.
That's really actually cool. I'll have to look into that a little bit further, because that's something that I've been wanting to try and work on in my own storytelling in games. So that's something I'm going to have to look into.
It's an important issue, but it's one that's so, how do you want to say it? It's really easy to be scared of making a misstep, and then because you're scared of making a misstep, you just kind of skirt around it altogether. And that sometimes is maybe not as egregious as misstepping, but it's still not addressing the problem.
Right.
But to come back around, though, more to inspiration as opposed to deeper topics, for me, sometimes I get ideas from odd places. And if you know me and you've hung around with me, I've invariably probably given most everyone I know some form of brainworm that, like, I never used to think about that until Steve mentioned it. But anyway, like, I'll get ideas for a character or for a campaign from a song lyric sometimes.
Oh yeah. I mean, can I talk about your character?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, you made a character from the Warren Zevon song, Mr. Badlock.
Mr. Bad Example.
Mr. Bad Example.
Yeah, the song is all about this guy who's just, I mean, he's a slime ball. And, go look it up on YouTube. I'm sure you can find it. But this guy is a slimeball con man who just goes from one con to the next, just trying to stay ahead of the people chasing him. And, like Zevon for me is someone I find amusing because the sense of humor in his lyrics is just different. And that's the only way I know to explain it.
Yes, it is. I like Warren Zevon. Zevon. I don't know how it's actually pronounced.
I always pronounced it Zevon, whether that's accurate or not, I don't know.
Well, and then for me to talk about characters for a little bit, I tend to get weird ideas.
Okay.
Like,
can I ask you a question on that vein?
Yeah.
Where the hell did Dubs come from?
Dubs came from the term wunderbar. That's where Dubs came from. No, I was looking at the doctor. I can't ever remember the character's name, but I was looking at the doctor from Invader Zim, and I went, what would I voice him like if I wanted to voice him? And I was like, oh, I'd make him stereotypically German and just obsessed with body modifications.
This was for Cyberpunk, by the way, folks.
Yeah, this was for Cyberpunk. And that's where Dubs came from. Dubs was just born out of this obsession with this idea of like, well, what happens if we transplant? Actually, I think I know right where Dubs came from. I was doing a little bit of research into some of the, I don't know how you want to put it, the fleed Nazi doctors, the Nazi scientists who left Germany to help form our
Project Manhattan?
Yes, well, but not just that, but to help form the space program.
Okay.
And I was like, what if we mixed those guys with some of the horrible stuff that happened during World War II? And then I was like, well, what if we do that, except rather than it being horrible, it's cyberpunk? And that's where Dubs come from.
Okay.
The one that intrigues me more, and I didn't really get to play with him, was the other character I built. And I can't remember what his name was.
You talking about the Dragonborn?
No, not the Dragonborn. The other character I built for your Cyberpunk campaign.
Oh, crap. I don't remember his name either. I just remember picturing, like, Mega Mullet.
Yeah, he was... So the other idea for a character I had in Cyberpunk, which I got to play with a little bit, was a character who was basically a armor plate wearing, like, wears Hawaiian shirt and shorts with heavy body armor on top, just rocking that 80s mullet, and is like perpetually stoned.
And like it's tropey, but like I don't know which one to pin it on.
No, exactly. Nobody knows, and that's how my brain works. Is everybody's like, this is super trope, but which trope is it? Because it's like it reminds me of the like what I refer to as like the redneck movies of the 80s. You know what I mean?
Give me some examples here. Sort
of like Dukes of Hazzard type, but not like Dukes of Hazzard had a higher standard than what I think more of. Like some of the sleazier Chuck Norris films, a lot of Seagal films, like those like action movies, but the ones that are like low budget action movies, basically.
Okay, see, now the image that's coming to mind, and now I kind of think where I was. Did you see the movie Beer for My Horses?
Yes, that's
Ted Nugent.
There you go. Yep. You've sort of hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, the not so great Dukes of Hazzard remake.
Well, it was better than I expected in some ways.
Yeah, I just say not so great because the show's great, but the Dukes of Hazzard remake, that's kind of that type of idea. But my characters are sometimes they're just these. I threw Scrabble tiles at the wall, except rather than it being Scrabble tiles, it was just a bunch of dice. I mean, like my Dragonborn character, he was kind of samey, but I just thought it would be fun to have a Dragonborn who rages and is calm 99% of the time.
Yeah, well, in a way, he was kind of like Beast.
Yeah, that's sort of where I pulled my inspiration from, was just a sort of hulking character who was chill most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's talk about some of your other characters. Let's talk about Man, I'm bad with your names. Let's talk about Frenchie.
Oh, Xavier.
Yeah.
Yes, well, the story about Xavier was that I was on the way to the first session for that campaign, and I'm going, what the voice do I want to use for this character? And so I just start talking like this, and he become kind of a smart-ass sorcerer.
Yeah.
Um,
Just like my, just like my no, or my. I think weren't they gnomes?
the witch?
No, they were goblins. In most recently,
Oh, yes.
the ones stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, well, no, well, gnomes was the most recent, but you did goblins earlier.
Yeah, the French gnomes.
Yes,
then,
it was the French gnomes.
which was just me kind of making fun of him, but
Well, and the fun part with X though is that that campaign wasn't the greatest because
no,
of a lot of factors, but the kind of smartassness and the crap giving between characters was we had a lot of fun with it.
oh yeah, we.
You know,
I'm not gonna say I remember much about what actually happened in that campaign, but I do remember what our characters ended up becoming towards the end of it.
well,
I just
I do remember the rest of the table insisting that I used the proper term when I went to cast my signature cantrip.
well, yeah,
But
oh
I mean, you can take, tropes and whatever. And look, the accent for me, I got to be an exchange student. What would normally have been my senior year of high school, I had already got all the credits I needed, so I effectively had graduated. So I went and lived in Belgium, French-speaking Belgium, for 11 months, and was thus exposed to a lot of people speaking English with very heavy French accents. And so it's something that, still 27, 8 years later, something like that, it still sticks in my head. And I still do speak a little bit of French, though not nearly what I used to.
yeah. A lot of my characters just sort of. This is why I end up having a bunch of them on my phone, because I'm usually just sitting somewhere and I have like it's like inspiration, but it's dumber than inspiration. Just something hits me and I'm like, ooh, that's the guy.
Well,
Um,
sometimes I'll be thinking about a character in a movie or something and going, well, how would I build, or I'll go, okay, so let's put, okay, I want to be kind of like a combination of Green Arrow and the Punisher. How would I build that?
yeah.
That kind of stuff happens to me all the time.
Well, and sometimes for my characters, they just end up lucking into their personality. So the idea was I'm gonna build a corp that wants to be a solo,
Mm-hmm.
except he just ends up being a really bad solo and not a great corp. Like not a great suit and a really bad solo.
Yeah, but I mean, like sometimes though, and this is where I think a lot of people, gaming is not necessarily about having the statistically best character, the statistically most capable. It's about having a good time. And the character you were just talking about, when you ran him for that one shot, it was like he was, so to speak, trying to run this Wetworks team of ragamuffin cyberpunks, and constantly having to try and report back to the office as to why did the whole machine blow up.
Yeah, and he's like trying to not he's trying to skirt the two worlds that really shouldn't mix.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was that was a fun one.
Yeah.
A lot of my NPCs, I love a lot of my NPCs that I come up with. They're just 9 times out of 10, they're just mean.
Well, see, like now for concepts, like NPCs, a lot of times I do kind of draw inspiration from this thing or that thing specifically. But when it comes to, and I've had this kind of weird idea in my head for a game concept. Basically, what I want to do is, in some form or other, rip off the concept of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., right? Specifically,
Mhm.
like the TV show. But there was a line in this song by this guy named Ray Wiley Hubbard that I know both you and I are familiar with some of his music. But there's a line in one of his songs, and it's something, something, and no one was cooler than the 13th floor elevators. And so I hear this and I go, well, who the heck are the 13th floor elevators? So I look it up. Turns out they were this like psychedelic rock band. But the idea that pops into my head is, okay, so what if the 13th floor elevators is a secret society? And like, you could use this in probably Call of Cthulhu, not so much, but something maybe you're more familiar with the fiction than I am, Steve, but like a Dresden Files type universe.
Yeah, you could probably do it somewhere in that world. You could probably make that work really well in Delta Green, actually.
It's impossibly, but where so to speak, it's a secret society that literally is like a pocket dimension type deal that is, because a lot of buildings, I believe, still to this day, technically leave out the 13th floor.
Yeah, it's a superstition thing.
Right.
Well, more modern buildings tend to leave it in, but I know a lot of older buildings built before probably 2010 leave it out.
Mm-hmm. But to sort of play on that, there's some sort of pocket dimension that you can access from be it the stairwell between the 12th and the 14th floor, or some
or some combination of numbers input on the number pad on the elevator to get you to the 13th floor.
Right, yeah. Like I said, I haven't fleshed out all the details, but it was a moment of inspiration, so that's why I'm bringing it up today.
Well, just not to get too much off of that, but I think that would work really well in Delta Green.
I think it could be worked into there, depending on how you wanted to do it.
I think if you thought about it, not necessarily that Delta Green was investigating that,
mm-hmm.
but maybe Delta Green's recruiting, and that's, maybe it's like a training area for Delta Green. Maybe it's like, I think that could be worked together. I think that could work really well. Actually.
That could work really well in like maybe Night's Black Agents.
True. It could work really well there. There's a lot of systems that could work with.
Yeah, well, vampire, any of the vampire storyteller type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You need a touch of the supernatural to make it work, but okay. Now, because I already have an idea that I'm trying to flesh out for Delta Green, but I don't want to say too much to you because I hope that you'll be one of the players.
No, victim. No, it's a Delta Green game. It's always victims. I assume I'm a victim anytime I play that engine.
But no, I really, I'm almost a full season behind, but it's sitting on the DVR upstairs. The show Manifest is really interesting.
I can't say I know that one. Manifest, is that the one? I don't know. I don't know the elevator pitch for that one.
That's the one with the plane that disappeared for...
Okay, so yeah, that's what I thought. And then they find... Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I've thought of different ways to take that idea and kind of reskin it, and I think that could work fabulously for a Delta Green campaign.
Television is not my strong suit. Like, we have television, but I hardly ever watch anything that's not something that I'm like actively involved in.
Well, I watch a lot more like History Channel and that kind of stuff, which something that I've gotten ideas from before, and I know I've mentioned it before on the podcast. I don't remember what episode. There's a show on, I don't know if it's Travel Channel or one of the history, but anyway, one of those networks, and it's called Mysteries of the Abandoned. And it's this cool show.
That is Travel Channel, yeah.
Where they go and they visit these abandoned sites, and it could be anything from, an old mining site in England with this gargantuan steam shovel thing to the old over-the-horizon radar site in Russia that's, or technically the Ukraine's right near Chernobyl, to assorted Cold War and World War II military installations that are now abandoned. Some of this stuff is just incredible. Or there was an old art institute that was built in Cuba that had this the architecture is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Some of this stuff, and you see this, and you go, ooh, I could use this element and this idea for this. And like I said, the thing is don't feel like, oh, I have to stay. No, take this part of this thing and put it with this part of this other thing, and just have a good time with it. That's this hobby is all about, is having a good time.
Nobody is making rules on what your story has to be. You know, if the system that you're playing in doesn't accommodate for that type of story, maybe it's time to change your system.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, I guess, for me, like, and part of, the thrust of this podcast is, don't feel like you have to play just one game. I mean, GM Chris said last week, Genesis is an amazing system, and I haven't yet experimented with it to know if there are things that it doesn't do the way I want it to. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to say it doesn't do them well, but it might not do it the way I want it to do it.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that, If you really want tactical, crunchy, deadly combat, then, maybe Warhammer Fantasy 4th Edition is the system for you. Part of me would like slightly crunchy, gritty, deadly fantasy, but I don't want that much crunch in it for me.
Right. Maybe you really like orcs that have a computer attached to them. So you can play Shadowrun.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, let me write that down real quick. Okay. Just my brain just went, ooh, that's a character and a half in there.
Aha.
See, that's what happens with me though, is that I'm a bad example when it comes to where do you get your inspiration from? Well, I say things.
But that's, what? I mean, look, at this point, 99% of us all carry around a smartphone, and I've only ever had Androids, so I'm going to reference Google Docs, but I'm sure Apple has something similar, and, well, you could still put Google Docs on your iPhone, I suppose. But I keep a file in my Google Docs that is nothing but me jotting down, odd concepts, one-line plot ideas, whatever. And just because if I write them down, if I don't write it down, I'll forget about it. And if I write it down on something on paper, I'll probably forget what notebook I wrote it in, because I don't know how many notebooks laying around the house, the car, work, wherever.
Right. I went to a writers conference once, and this was specifically for sci-fi writers. I'd been invited by somebody I was hanging out with, and they were like, yeah, come to this writers conference with me. I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound up my alley. Well, I ended up sitting in on a bunch of really interesting conversations, and one of them was this idea, and he posed the idea that if you hear somebody say something interesting, say they say something in an interesting sentence, write that down. Use that for inspiration later.
Mm-hmm.
Say you're out, you're drinking coffee, and somebody comes in and goes, I can't believe they smacked their grandma. Like, write that down. That's inspiration for something. Go read that later, because it can trigger parts of the brain to make you think in different ways.
Yeah, like I think we both said it, don't be afraid to put that together with something else. I don't know what off the top of my head, but you can add stuff together, and sometimes, well, like we talked about sometimes with the characters, where you take like 4 tropes and mash them together, and so it looks familiar, but it's not, and that's the
Right.
thing is, or sometimes take a trope and stand it on its head.
No, sometimes 2 and 2 does not equal 4. It's a matter of just finding what you want to, finding your voice, finding how you want to tell your character. Playing with different peoples, I pick up different mannerisms from other people just because that's how they do things. Perfect example. So you were talking about living in Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
I lived for a month just outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
I came back with a southern drawl.
Doesn't honestly terribly surprise me. I have a tendency to pick up bits of accent as well sometimes.
But I came back and it was, my family was like, where did you get that? I'm like, Georgia. I'm like, you left without one and came back with one. Where did you get that? I got it from Georgia. Also learned that I really like Pepsi. Because when you live outside of Atlanta, Georgia, that's all you get is Coke. But that's a tangent and a half right there. But no, being around people can influence ideas and influence your tastes and how you give a character a voice. Maybe you have a friend that has a really quirky vocal pattern, so you give your character that quirky vocal pattern.
Yeah, I think that you have to be careful to a point. If you're playing with that person,
yeah, don't do it and be rude about it. But if it's something where Maybe even ask them, hey, do you mind if I voice my character in this way?
Yeah.
Not in any way be rude about it, but I'm saying more along the lines of, I have a friend that doesn't play D&D, that has a very interesting, like, the way he speaks is very interesting.
Uh-huh.
So maybe I'll borrow a little bit of his, like, cadence. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, cadence or sometimes you have someone you work with, whatever, has a kind of an odd phrase that they use, and turn that into a catchphrase for your character in some form or other.
And sometimes it's purely visual. Like, sometimes, especially in D&D, if I'm making a character in D&D, I'll open the player handbook and look and be like, I could work with that. Sometimes it's literally take preconceived notions and throw them against the wall. Like, I was watching a video the other day from an artist on TikTok who was proposing the idea of, you don't have to have traditional fantasy voices just because you're in a fantasy setting. And his proposal was to have essentially like Midwestern cultists.
Uh-huh. Well, to tie back to a previous episode and also into other people in the network, when GM Eric from Everon Renewed was on with us, he talked about how he's been trying to do Sharn in their current Everon campaign as different New York accents.
Right. And sometimes it's even just do local dialect. Just, and he talked about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think that if you're having trouble with inspiration, I think you might be thinking about it too hard, because everybody, I don't want to say everybody, but most people have things that interest them outside of this hobby. And if there's something that interests you outside of this hobby, you can definitely pull from that with no issues. Nobody's going to be like, oh man, you took that character straight out of this book, or you took that character straight from Star Wars, because you're going to put your own spin on it, whether you realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Me playing Han Solo and Harrison Ford playing Han Solo play him two very different ways.
Yeah. Or take, I did this, and I think this was right before you joined the group that we play with. I played a halfling barbarian who I took kind of inspiration from, think kind of crazy hyper like Steve Irwin, combined with, I think his name, the Australian doctor on MASH called Ugly John, I believe.
Yeah.
And Robin Williams when he first comes through the portal in the original Jumanji. Kind of mash all three of those together. He was hilarious, this little crazy, and halfling that, and actually he was a dex-based build, which shouldn't have worked, but actually did very well. But so he's got this rapier, and he's just buzzing around like crazy, and his shield is just an old turtle shell, and it was just like I said, I took like three things that most people can kind of recognize and went, what happens if I put them all together?
Well, take a look at my current campaign where we're playing Eberron, and I have the Warforged butler Jimmy.
Yes.
What if you took a butler and made him hyperactive? Like,
yeah, that's true.
That's the whole concept of Jimmy, is that he talks to our one character in a particular way because that character saved his life, and he also understands that character is not, how do I want to say this, the smartest? Maybe the most mature. There we go.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So he understands that character is not the most mature, so he treats them more towards their maturity level.
Mm-hmm.
But he treats everybody else like a normal human being.
Yeah. Although he has, the part of the, I don't know if you want to call it his warforgedness is sometimes he's extremely literal with things.
Yeah, he can be. But that's just what happens if A plus B equals Y.
Yeah.
No, it's just this, sometimes like Jimmy's character and personality came out of me bored one day going, what is this NPC's, like, what was this NPC's life before we got to where we are?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, what if he was a courier? Well, what does that mean in the world of a Warforged? Well, that means that he can run abnormally fast. He wears super light armor. He's not your standard like killing machine, but he was definitely built to be faster in the war. Mm-hmm. Built to get ideas out there at a faster rate,
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's, that's the thing is to look at it And sometimes, like you said, you're thinking too hard, and so just take a basic idea and then kind of step back from it and look at it and go, well, what does that mean in terms of, how this character would act in this situation or that situation, or even to, take it to if you're building a world, how does, to take Keith Baker's original statement as far as Eberron, what happens if we approach magic as a science that we know we can cast this spell and this will happen and we can repeat it, That was what birthed what is Eberron.
I think sometimes, and this is my opinion, is that sometimes rather than trying to come up with a character, especially in D&D, I do this a lot. Rather than trying to come up with a character, I make my character like roll numbers and have sort of just a generic blob of a thing and let the story shape who they become. I let the story sort of build on what their voice is, where they go, how they become what they are. And this can mean that at the very beginning of your campaign, maybe your character's a little bland, but at the end of the campaign, you have somebody who is incredibly fleshed out.
Yeah. And although this is also a thing where, maybe you have a basic idea in your head and then you sit down for a session 0 at the start of a campaign, and together with the rest of the table, you get some of those ideas starting so that when you really start actually playing, you've got some of it, and then, okay, you can add in details that, you didn't actually say beforehand, but they don't actually really change anything. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to just go, well, you hate bartenders because something silly, but, let's say it just strikes you randomly that your character maybe is extremely phobic of cats, and you spring that in a moment. Well, that really doesn't. It's not going to be something. I mean, yes, that's a tool for your game master to then be able to leverage against you, but it's also a character thing that, I don't know. It can just be fun. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll be honest, sometimes as a game master, I don't catch stuff like that. I've kicked myself a couple times where the players have been like, "Oh, I'm glad you didn't play on this phobia of my character." I'm like, when did you say you had a phobia of that?" "Oh, well, I said it." Now, oh man, I was doing something else. And not in a bad way, but like, oh man, I just didn't catch that part. Um uh
Did both our trains of thought leave the station at the same time?
Yep, they left us standing on the platform.
You know,
You hear that off in the distance?
yeah, that's just. But yeah, I think inspiration is so much where you find it, and even like I've told you about it, and I'm not the biggest Star Trek fan, so it's not a great analogy, I guess, or something. I don't know. But I had thought of the idea of playing a Warforged knowledge cleric as a very kind of Data-esque, almost android that was just very coldly stating facts and just spouting knowledge about things as things happen around him, kind of half confused because he's repeating facts and you know what I mean?
Right, and that's when I start as a DM, not to completely ruin that character for you, but as a DM, that's when I start throwing in things that are completely illogical.
See, I know what I was thinking. I was thinking, again, my Star Trek knowledge is not that good, but kind of like Data meets Sheldon from
Okay.
Big Bang.
Yeah, see, that's when I start throwing in, like, you start facing things that warp what the mind actually sees.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, how does that character react when up is now down?
Yeah, that could be actually a lot of fun in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, having a very logic-based character and then throwing logic against the wall and just changing up how that character thinks about the world, or how the world is around that character. And sometimes I find myself doing this as a DM. Sometimes my players will come up with a character that I'm like, man, I really like that character. Not that I'm gonna steal it, but I'm gonna sort of take their worldview and play with it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe my players show up with a very naive character. Well, now I'm gonna just start throwing things that are gonna educate this character. Just world experiences that maybe they didn't have before. Just really cool stuff like that. You can do a lot, and again, don't be afraid to borrow from media that you consume. Everybody consumes media in some way or another. We've talked about music. You steal a lot from music. I steal very little. I would say, although I would say that I want to say that character's name was Jethro, the one from Cyberpunk
I
that
think
was
you're
the solo.
correct.
I want to say Jethro came from Ray Wiley Hubbard as well. Actually, I'm almost certain it came from him. It came from his version of Choctaw Bingo.
Okay.
Because that was where my mind was at when I was rolling them up. I'm like, oh, yeah,
That's
this
a
is
cool
where my
song.
brain's at. Yeah. But it came from that. It came from like that Sturgill Simpson, those type of guys.
Mm-hmm.
But, sometimes music can be an inspiration. Sometimes books can be an inspiration. Sometimes movies can be an inspiration. Sometimes straight art can be an inspiration for what you want to do. For me, Cyberpunk, when I want to write a really good Cyberpunk story, my desktop background on my computer that I record the podcast weekly on has a rotating Cyberpunk like art gallery. And I know I've written a bunch of Cyberpunk stories while just having my background cycle just to give me ideas.
Mm-hmm.
There are images and art that can really disturb you, and sometimes it's not what's disturbing. Sometimes it's but there's some artists that can really inspire feelings or inspire ideas, and I'll steal from art.
Anything that gives you an idea.
Yeah, it's anything that gives me an idea.
I said it on our horror episode. We talked about that one title that was in the article we were talking about I think was called Soth. And the whole premise of that particular game was to take effectively your classic Call of Cthulhu scenario of we have to thwart the cult before they finish summoning Big Bad Evil Thing and turning it on its head and going, we're the cult. We have to finish summoning the Big Bad Evil Thing before we get caught. So don't be afraid to just take whatever it is and just turn it upside down.
So I've been sort of secretly working on a Call of Cthulhu idea. And the reason I've been sort of it's on the back burner. Like it's every now and again I get a thought for it. But I saw the painting, just to get back to paintings, I saw Edward Hopper's 1927 Automat, which is it's one of his popular paintings. It was on the cover of Time magazine. But it's just a woman sitting at a table with a window behind her, and it just looks like the pit of despair is behind her. Hopper was known for a lot of things, but the way this painting is, it's just there's this empty space behind her.
I was gonna say, yeah, it looks almost like a train tunnel.
Yeah, and it's this perfect, like, and it was somewhere in looking at this photo or looking at this painting that my brain was like, what if there's something in the darkness? And I know that a lot of people have played with that, but for whatever reason, that struck my, hey, let's start writing a Call of Cthulhu story behind this.
Yeah. Like I said, inspiration is everywhere. And even if it doesn't initially seem like it's a great idea, jot it down somewhere and maybe add it to something else and put it together, mash it up with something else and have fun with it. That's it. Just have fun with it. And don't be afraid. The other thing is, if you're mashing this stuff together, then a lot of people may not realize that you borrowed it from 3 different places. They're going, wow, that's a really cool idea. And you're just going, well, crap, I just stole it from 3 different people. That's all.
Right. But it's just take what inspires you and go with it. You don't even have to be inspired by it. Sometimes just if you like something, run with it.
Yeah.
And take it to its logical conclusion. Take it to its illogical conclusion.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to double down and go, well, this is great, but what happens if I go farther than what I would normally?
What happens if you turn it up to 11?
Yeah, The same way, what happens if I turn it down to 1? What happens if I turn it up to 11?
Mhm.
You know, where does this go? What's the end point here? And sometimes, and I think sometimes the best characters are found in the bizarre. You know, it's not always that your character has to be. If you really enjoy playing Fighter Man, that's great. You like being the guy that's just sort of a generic fighter. But one of my favorite characters from Critical Role was Grog, who is pretty much a generic big guy, but because of his low intelligence, they played with that.
Mhm.
Travis really played into that character not being a smart guy. Like,
Yeah. But he did it in a way that it was comical, but not.
annoying.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, and in Critical Role Campaign 2, we have two characters that are sort of like that. We have Not, played by Sam Riegel. We have Jester, and to some extent Caduceus, but Caduceus is sort of not as extreme as the other two.
Caduceus isn't smart, but he's very wise.
Yeah. And you can tell that Taliesin plays into that very well.
Mhm.
But Jester's immature,
Mhm.
and Not is abrasive. And these characters work really well together because if you put Jester with somebody like Yasha, who's very reserved, Jester being a little kid and Yasha being this very reserved character, it makes for really fun interactions between those two.
Mhm.
And Caleb and Not hanging out together, Caleb being this very smooth, dirty magician, and Not being this very aggressive character, it really balances out. And sometimes if you have a character that you think is too much, maybe it is, but at other times you think you have a character that's too much, but maybe the party balances out perfectly.
Yeah. That's the other thing, is you do want to watch and, make sure your character isn't your character and you as the player behind them aren't taking too much of the spotlight. And this can get weird because sometimes you end up where the rest of the table really likes watching you play this character. But at the same time, you feel awkward because they want me to do all the talking. You know what I mean?
Right. Or I've been there where I played in a campaign once where somebody just wanted to take it and run away with the campaign. It's like, no, you're not the whole story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not saying that sometimes that works, but other times just be mindful that there's other players at the table. This is a group game, not, there are solo RPGs, and I think we're going to get into that at some point, but
I'm working on that actually.
yeah, so when you're playing, be mindful of the other people at the table. And that means that if you're telling a story, make sure you're giving fair chance for everybody to tell a story. And that can be difficult sometimes, but giving everybody their little bit of time is important.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that, I think we've sort of... Is there anything else you really wanted to touch on as far as inspiration?
I don't think so. I think, what time it might be, Steve? I think it might be time to introduce Gamer Nation to Game of the Week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
You want me to go or you to go?
You go ahead and go. I think I went first last week.
Yeah, you went last week. That's right. You went first last week. Well, mine, I had to do a little bit of digging.
Uh-oh. You get in trouble with a shovel.
Yeah, I can be trouble with a shovel because I found Mechton Zeta Plus by Artalsorian Games.
Okay.
I'll let you look that one up. Do you know Mechton Zeta Plus?
I'm not familiar with Mechton Zeta Plus.
But you're familiar with Mechton Zeta?
I know the name, except
Okay.
I can't spell it.
Mektonzeta, and then the plus is just sort of their second edition.
Okay. Now I'm gonna have to look it up differently. My whatchamacallit's being weird.
So, Mechton Zeta and Mechton Zeta Plus are mech games from Artalsorian around the same time that they were putting out Cyberpunk.
Okay.
It's it's very, so if you like, I really like 90s anime,
Mm-hmm.
and Mechton Zeta and Mechton Zeta Plus are 90s anime giant robot games.
Kind of Robotech-y.
Yes, very Robotech, reminds me of Gundam, Robotech, stuff like that. Stuff along those lines. I was trying to think, there's other ones that I just can't grab off the top of my head. But it is very anime inspired. It's building a mech, but it's run in the interlock system, which is the cyberpunk system.
Ooh, I like.
So it's not a cyberpunk supplement. It is its own game, but it's the same basic system, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than just combat. It is role playing. You design your mech. You're designing a character. You're telling that story, and it's really cool. I didn't know this existed, and then I was sort of just playing around, and I was like, this is up my alley.
This does look interesting.
It is up my alley. It's something that I definitely want to check out and look into a little bit further, because I love Cyberpunk and I love that system, and to have a game that's sort of in the same system is just really cool.
Yeah. Well, it says at the bottom of this that it
Mixes with Cyberpunk really well.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That could be
So
fun.
it's meant to be played either on its own, or you can play it interlocked with Cyberpunk, which would be really cool. I mean, you could get some serious mech happening
Yes.
in Cyberpunk. Maybe that's what's happening in the Wasteland.
Yeah.
There's a movie from the 80s called Robot Jocks, where giant robots battle it out in the desert to see, rather than wars being fought, every nation just sort of submits. Okay, so this is the American robot, this is the Russian robot. They're going to go duke it out in the desert. Whoever wins ends up technically winning that war.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this sort of gives me vibes of Robot Jocks, which is, that's one of those ones that if you haven't seen it, I really recommend that movie.
Yeah, this does look interesting, because I do remember the old, Macross Robotech stuff that Palladium put out, and in that engine there was an astounding amount of information to keep track of for that. Like, you'd have a 2-page character sheet and another 2 sheets for your mech, and it would give you a headache. Not you, but anyone.
Yeah, I can't say that this isn't super complicated, because I haven't really read the book.
Mm-hmm.
But based on who wrote it, when it came out, and the fact that they're saying it can be played alongside or interlocked with Cyberpunk, I would say it's probably pretty manageable.
Yeah, I would guess. Well, I've said it before. There are people who say that Cyberpunk is crunchy, and I'm not necessarily going to disagree with them. But what I think the case for me, at least, is that I feel like I get a lot more out of the crunch in Cyberpunk than I do out of the crunch in, say, 5th Ed D&D.
Yeah, I agree. I think the crunch in Cyberpunk is more useful than a lot of the crunch in D&D.
Yeah, I was going to say, for Cyberpunk being as admittedly simulationist as it was designed, it really doesn't have a lot of the just psychotic crunch add-ons that a lot of games that try to do that do.
Oh yeah. Well, and one of the things I like about Cyberpunk is that, and this is something I'll speak to as far as that goes, and it's a big difference between it and D&D. D&D gives you a lot of generic terms for things, and you sort of have to figure out which one fits what you want to do. In Cyberpunk, there's a lot of very specific terms for your character's abilities, and that's super useful on a DM side.
Mm-hmm.
Like, deciding whether to do a perception or an insight check it can be a bit daunting in D&D. Like, are you perceiving that they're lying, or are you actively pressing them on it if they're lying?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference between those two. I think I just watched a video where they were talking. I sent it to you, where they talked about the different social ladders and all that.
Yeah.
But, I think sometimes in D&D especially, perception and insight checks can get mixed up because sometimes you go, well, I want to roll insight. Well, insight's not going to tell you if he's lying. Insight's going to tell you a little bit about his posture. It's going to tell you about his mannerisms. It's not going to be a yes or no, he's lying to you.
Yeah. And well, that's also too comes to, how does the DM or GM that you play with interpret that? Because that's going to
Right.
vary from game to game as well.
But not only that, but like, so in D&D, it's I want to do this, so I have to figure out which roll I have to make. In Cyberpunk, if I want to drive a car, what car are you driving? How fast is it going?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And look at the appropriate table. Are you riding a motorcycle or are you driving a car? Right?
Yeah. And by the way, yes, folks, we are aware that, well, by the time you all hear this, the new Cyberpunk Red will be out. But in the wonderful world of the way how podcasts work, we're still a few days ahead of that in our now time.
That's coming up fast.
Yeah.
Real fast. That just hit me. I'm looking at what today's date is. That's going to be there. Yeah. Ooh, that's exciting.
So, anything more you want to say on Mecton Zeta Plus?
No, I think I'm pretty happy with that. This is one I'm picking up. And definitely going to look into it a little bit further.
Say it does have, I noticed it's got 39 or 37 ratings on drive-through and 4.5 stars. So
yeah, people like it. It's got a couple comments too, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, people like it, and I just didn't know it existed. And I was, like I said, I was on drive-through, and I'm like, because drive-through has this wonderful tab in genre. It's the miscellaneous tab, and you got family, gaming, fantasy, historical, horror, modern, science fiction, and then just one labeled miscellaneous. And I love the miscellaneous tab.
See, I had never actually noticed that. Oh.
And then the miscellaneous tab actually opens up to a bunch of other things.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just tab around in miscellaneous, you can find some pretty interesting stuff in there. That's where I find a lot of my games of the week.
Cool. Well, I'm not even sure how I stumbled into this, but I saw it and I went, oh. And I remember a couple weeks ago we were talking something about pirates, and I happened to stumble across, this is actually a setting technically for Savage Worlds, but it's called 50 Fathoms, specifically 50 Fathoms Explorers Edition, which is not the current edition, I believe, but the edition before the Savage Worlds rules. But there is, and you can find it on drive-through, there is an update to this to the Adventure Edition, I believe, is the newest. Anyway, but this is basically kind of a Pirates of the Caribbean weird pirate kind of thing, right? The blurb is, the world is drowning. The natives say 3 witches in Agrapog were sentenced to death by the king, drowned by the rising tide. They cursed the land and all this weird stuff. So you've got like these weird crab monsters, and it just looks like it could be a lot of fun. Like, again, to me, looks like it could be a lot of really, really neat inspiration to just take this idea and tweak it a little bit, but to have a lot of fun with kind of I don't know if you want to call it a Deadlands twist on Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah, that could be cool. You know what I've always wanted? I never did any research to see if there's one that exists. But I've always wanted an RPG that was a pirate RPG where you play effectively a properly running ship where you're in charge of raising the masts. All right, that's my job. That's what I do. I raise and lower them. And that's Bob. He's in charge of the cannons.
Uh-huh.
And this is John. He's in charge of keeping everybody fed.
Mm-hmm.
And like having a very realistic ship sailing RPG, I think that would be really cool.
Almost like a simulator-y type thing.
Yeah. And maybe not just simulatory, but like, you could do other things with that where you have people come and invade, but I just think that would be it's always something that I'm interested in. Pirates are neat.
Yeah, I think it just, like I said, it struck me as being something that could just, I don't know, could be a lot of fun. I've wanted to try out Savage Worlds for a while anyway. yeah, like I said, I just think that looks like it could be the source for a lot of fun. And like I said, I saw it when I was digging around on drive-through. There is, the cost for the PDF on this 50 Fathoms is $10. Well, $9.99, but yeah, $10. But the update to take it up to Savage Worlds Adventure Edition is a free download. So yeah, you do have to buy it, and it's technically, but you can get the updated stats and so forth for free. So it's cheap, and hey, even if you buy it and you take the ideas that are in it and put it into a different game system you already have, no one's going to come take your books and tell you can't do that.
I think with that, we've reached the end of the episode.
Yeah, I think so.
We want to thank you for listening. We want to thank to anyone who's come from the D20 Radio Network. I assure you we're slightly less rambling on our other episodes. This was just sort of a off-the-cuff episode.
But only slightly. We
Only
usually
slightly.
at least point ourselves in a direction before we get lost.
Right. Today was just sort of...
Yeah.
It was one of those where we were like, let's talk about something. What do we want to talk about?
Yeah. It's like, we need to get something down, so let's do something. So yeah, listen to some of the stuff we've already done. Come find us on the Discord, holler at us. I'm sure Chris and JT and company will get us linked up over there. Or like I said, the link for our Discord should be in the show notes. Hit us up on Twitter.
Yeah, at And RPGs. Hit us up on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. Again, on Discord, here we are at Me and Steve RPGs.
But yeah, come holler at us. Tell us you want to hear us talk about something.
Yeah, feel free to give us ideas, or if you think we're doing something wrong, leave us a comment. Come into our Discord, tell us that you don't like my voice. You're really
Steve,
not
I don't like your voice.
Oh man, well I guess you gotta suck it up and deal with it.
Hey, look, I have the edit button.
Oh no.
Oh, but no, seriously, like
I'll just start my own podcast. I'll still call it the Me and Steve podcast. It'll just be me and myself.
Well, yeah, I mean, or if you think there's somebody that we ought to talk to, by all means, let us know. The worst thing we can do is try and get told no.
Yeah,
So,
or send them our way. If you know somebody that you're like, man, they should talk to this guy, and
Yeah.
you know them and you have contact with them, be like, hey, you should talk to these guys.
yeah, we're happy to have someone else talk instead of us.
Yeah, as you see with previous episode.
Well, you know what? I GM Chris is wonderful, and he really is just he's so enthusiastic, and
It is, yeah, it's great to have him on, and it's really nice to bring on guests and bring on people like GM Chris who has a passion like we have for this hobby, and
mhm.
really cares about watching it grow and expanding it in all the right ways.
Yeah. So again, thank you to him. Thank you for GM Eric, who was our first guest.
Yep. Thank you to GM Eric.
Also part of the D20 network. Thanks to everyone out there in Gamer Nation. We'd appreciate it if you keep listening to us, or start listening to us, or tell your friends, tell your enemies. Probably we shouldn't encourage like random street graffiti promoting the podcast.
I mean, I'm not promoting it, but if it happens, send us pictures.
I noticed we got a hit this week. I was looking at the analytics. We got a hit from the Philippines.
Yeah, shout out to two guys from Western Pennsylvania. Shout out to all of the people who are not in the United States that listen to us. I just want to,
Shout out to the people in the United States too, for that matter.
yeah, anybody who listens to us. If you listen to the podcast weekly and you want to yell at us, or even if you don't want to yell at us, come hang out in our Discord. We got a lot of really cool people. I've said it before, but we are going to start doing Game of the Week. I'm going to start running some stuff, just one-shots, one-offs. Cool stuff is happening.
Yeah, if I get down off of 55, 60-hour weeks, I'd like to do that too.
Yeah, I definitely want to... There's a couple games that I want to just grab. Cyberpunk, I was actually thinking about if I can get my hands on a PDF copy, as long as I can get it read soon enough. I was thinking about within like the next week running grabbing some people and just running a short one shot of Cyberpunk.
Oh, that'd be cool. You mean the
The red.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Because, at the time of recording, red drops this Saturday. So,
Yeah.
if I can get my hands on a PDF copy of it, I should be able to. For me, it's just finding the money to do it. But
Yeah.
as long as I can get my hands on a PDF copy of it, I'm looking at running sometime in the very near future a Cyberpunk Red, just maybe 3-4 hour one shot.
Cool. So I think that's pretty much it for us this week, is it not?
It is. I want to thank you for listening, and be kind to one another, and get out there and play some RPGs. Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/meandsteverpg. Thank you, and be kind to each other.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
Yeah, sometimes 2 and 2 does not equal 5. Or it doesn't need... Wow, whoa.
Yeah, well,
Whoa.
Steve, sometimes 2 and 2 does not equal 5.
I would imagine so. Wow. That was a winner right there, is what that was. Oh, I was thinking about something for April Fool's Day. We should have to roll a die. Whoever rolls the lowest is the person that gets all of their ums and ands and everything kept in.
Oh.
I just thought that would be funny.